It's organized by the United Nations Environment Program, the Philippine Center for Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development, Inc., and UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center through the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project, which is funded by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety through their International Climate Initiative program. So, climate investment and financing in tourism has become more than ever important in the COVID-19 recovery context, where building back better and greener is essential to ensure a sustainable, competitive, and inclusive tourism sector. So, there is an urgent need and opportunity for the public sector and private tourism businesses to shift to investments and financing that accelerate the transformation and resilience of the sector, considering environmental, health, and geopolitical threats. So let's take a look at what we have in store for everyone in the next slide, which will be showing the agenda. So, the objective of this webinar is to discuss how tourism businesses can identify investment needs and financing opportunities, learn more about existing opportunities and approaches for tourism businesses to benefit and develop financial proposals for climate mitigation actions based on the publication Making the Business Case for Climate Smart Investments Guidelines for the Tourism Sector, and also share information on practical examples of international and local climate investment. And lastly, gather feedback from you participants on your climate mitigation financial standpoint, understanding, and of course, your needs to support you on this topic. So, tackling our objectives for today's webinar, we will be speakers from none other than UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, GIZ, and representing one of the countries where the TVC project is being implemented is Land Bank of the Philippines. So please do pay attention to what our speakers have to say, take notes, ask lots of questions in time for our open forum later on. Okay, so for some house rules in the next slide. OMG. Oh, sorry. Okay. I do apologize for that, everyone, for technical difficulties. Um, yeah, our internet connection here in the Philippines is constantly a challenge, as our my fellow Filipinos will notice as well. So, yeah, while we wait for our IT to put back the screen, so I'll just be giving some house rules. Again, if you can, please change your username to reflect your organization and your full name for documentation purposes. Kindly mute your mic when not speaking. I think everyone's mic is disabled anyway. There will also, but you have the chat box for that for answering for asking your questions, because there will be an open forum, so kindly note down your questions beforehand or send them in the chat box for our panelists to answer. Oh no. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so participants will be receiving a recording of this training as well as a summary report for their reference. So allow me to provide some context on our webinar from the Philippines perspective. If we may have the slides again. Okay, there we go. Okay, so apologies for that again, everyone. Please bear with us. So yeah, in the next slide, just to provide like a context from the Philippines perspective. So from the pictures that you see on the slides, you all know our country has been very blessed with a beautiful tourism industry. The sector plays an important role in the Philippine economy, and the country boasts of rich natural beauty in its many spectacular beaches, sunny weather, and rich biodiversity. Next slide, please. And more than that, the Philippines' unique and complex culture, as exemplified by its people, cuisine, and lifestyle, attracts many people to visit the country, making the tourism sector a key economic and social development pillar that provides a lot of potential for sustainable growth, employment, technological innovation, and investment, among others. In the next slide. So, amidst all of this economic development and with the pandemic still ongoing up to the present, an international call for a green recovery for the tourism sector ensued. The call highlights better conservation and sustainable management of our natural tourism destinations, such as beaches, oceans, mountains, parks, and forests, which is seen as vital to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, part of the global movement to answering this call is the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project, a UNEP led project that seeks to reduce GHG emissions and increase resource efficiency in high resource tourism sectors in developing countries and small island developing states, namely Dominican Republic, Philippines, Mauritius, and St. Lucia. PSEPSD is the organization implementing the project in the Philippines, together with the Department of Tourism and other local partners cooperating with UNEP on this webinar. So, through the project and, of course, this webinar, we aim to encourage conversations and initiatives on financing the implementation of climate action projects to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions of the industry. So, carrying over, I'd like to give the floor to Andrea Bacher from UNEP, who will also be saying a few words about this topic. So, over to
Thank,
you, Andrea.
thank you very much, Andy, and welcome everyone. And again, thank you that you have joined us at this webinar today. As Andy already mentioned, tourism is a very important sector for the Philippines, but it's of course a sector which is also globally one of the key sectors that provides livelihoods and jobs for millions of people. And I think there's a clear understanding of the linkage to financing and investment to transition towards a low carbon and resource efficient and also inclusive tourism sector. There are many different versions of and a variety of financing that is available, whether it's climate finance, green finance, blue finance, sustainable finance. So there are different variations. Alone in the Philippines Sustainable Finance Roadmap, we find over 50 international finance resources for climate mitigation and adaptation actions. But of course, many more are available. The market is very big, both on all levels, whether it's national, regional, or international. There are public instruments such as subsidized loans or grants or credit guarantees. We have private instruments such as green bonds, loans, and many others, which can also be a form of the public-private cooperation, which you will hear today, two examples from GIZ and the Land Bank, of course, and we are very grateful that they will share today their examples. But it's not always easy, of course, to already identify the source. When is a tourism business directly eligible for these investments? When then can they apply, direct or indirect? There's a variety of options existing. For example, the Climate Investment Funds has been working very often through the Philippines Chamber of Commerce, but there are also mechanisms and schemes where tourism business can directly apply for financing. And often, of course, tourism businesses also self-finance actually mitigation actions. Um, all in all, it always depends, of course, on the upfront costs. How long does it take to pay back, or is there additional amount needed to pay back the additional cost? And does the mitigation action fit the business model? And that's really where we came to this webinar and also the publication Andy already mentioned from UNEP on making the business case for climate smart investments. And we would like to showcase, as Annie already mentioned today, really how can you identify some sources, how can you write, very importantly, a business proposal, how can you actually see if you need financing for mitigation actions, and this is then followed, as you already heard, from two public-private financing examples from GSZ and the Land Bank. So again, thank you very much for joining, and I give the floor back to Andy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Andrea. Yes, indeed, there have been a lot of climate financing initiatives already going on. We just have to kind of push them towards the spotlight a bit more, so that we know more about them, of course. So again, thank you for that, Andrea. We now move forward to hearing from our speakers without further ado, their expertise and insights on this topic. So, starting off with our first set of speakers, who will be discussing identifying potential sources of financing and practical guidance on writing business proposals for climate smart investments from UNEP CCC, Dennis Degan and Subhash Dar. So, next slide, please. So, a bit about our speakers. So, Dennis is the head of the Mitigation Analysis and Data Management section at UNEP CCC. His focus is on climate transparency and capacity development on long term planning for climate change mitigation in developing countries. Dennis manages and participates in several projects, and he coordinates, among others, the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, which is a multi donors initiative focusing on climate transparency in 30 countries. His work history spans three continents: Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean and Africa. And followed by Dennis is Subhash Dar, who is a senior researcher at UNEP CCC and a senior fellow at Global Center for Environment and Energy, Ahmedabad University. He was the lead author for Transport chapter in the sixth assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and was a contributing author for the fifth assessment of IPCC. His research interests include sustainable urban transport, low carbon development in developing countries, technology transfer, and climate change, and he has published a number of peer reviewed papers on these topics. He holds a doctoral degree from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. So, without further ado, Dennis and Subhash, you may have the floor.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Yes. Okay, so thanks a lot and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar today, and thanks for to UNEP and the Philippines to invite us to speak on this webinar too. So my colleague Subhash will actually go through the publication. So we'll explain you. He will guide you through the publication that has been developed and that Andrea has mentioned. But before giving him the floor, I would like maybe to take 2-3 minutes to remind the international context for this webinar and also for this publication. So, as you know, of course, so climate change as global warming, also known as global warming, is one of the major challenges that humankind has faced. And as you may know, also to avoid the worst effect of climate change, we should limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100, expressed as an increase of the global average temperature so by 2100. And to achieve this global goal, temperature goal, the global emissions, the global GHG greenhouse gas emission should peak around 2025, and the global emission of carbon dioxide, which is one of the major gas contributing to climate change, should reach net zero around 2050. So now the bad news, so to speak, is that if we follow the current policy scenarios, so the policy scenarios that all countries over the world are implementing currently, so we would go for a temperature rise of about 3 degrees Celsius, so far beyond what the global target of 1.5 Celsius that I have just mentioned. Now, the good news is that though it is urgent to act, there is still time to act. And today, so there are a lot of low emission technologies which are available to public and private stakeholders. So in this context, as you may have heard, in 2015, the countries which are part of the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change have adopted the Paris Agreement. And this was a major success, as it was the first time in the context of the climate change negotiations that 195 countries, which were part of the convention, had agreed on a universal legally binding climate instruments. And the Paris Agreement established a global framework to strengthen the global response to the threats of climate change in the context of sustainable development. So under the Paris Agreement, each country, so including, for example, the Philippines, is required to produce and submit to the UNFCCC Secretariat on a regular basis every 5 years what is known as their nationally determined contribution, so the NDC. So the NDC of a country sets out the effort of this country to combat climate change, including the mitigation goal, so the mitigation target of this country. And at national level, so the NDCs are translated into individual policies and measures that countries now are in the process of designing and have already started to implement. So, for example, in the case of Philippines, so the government of the Philippines submitted its first NDC in April 2021. And in this NDC, so the Philippines commits to a projected GHG emission reduction and avoidance of 75% for the period 2020 to 2030, in reference against a projected business as usual cumulative economy-wide emission scenario. So why is this important for you, so the businesses in the Philippines? Well, first of all, because it is well known today that to achieve the global mitigation target, so the 1.5 degrees that I have mentioned, but also to achieve the individual country target that each country has established in their NDC, so the private sector is an important and a key player. So indeed, to transitioning from the current development pathway to a low emission one, this requires significant investment, of course, and innovation, which are a consideration which usually are led by the private sector. So in addition, in relation to the tourism sector, so the tourism sector has a dual relationship with climate change, being both contributor and a victim of climate change. So it is a contributor, of course, because in the daily operation, so for example, in relation with the transport activities or the electricity use activities, so the national stakeholders, the private businesses, contribute to produce a GHG emission. Now, the tourism sector, will also suffer from several direct and indirect impacts of climate change. So in this context, it is well known today that adopting and implementing low emission technologies can be win-win options, allowing companies to optimize the use of their resources, reduce their operation costs, and increase their efficiency while improving their environmental performance and tackling climate change. And this is what the publication that my colleague Subhash will introduce is about. So this publication wants to show you that how to convert investment in low emission technologies into opportunities. So the publication provides few examples of low emission technologies, of low emission options, which might be available for your businesses. So the publication also identified potential sources of finance, which might be relevant for you. And finally, the publication also helps you to structure and develop finance proposals for mitigation actions. So this being said, so I hope, of course, that you will find this publication useful. I hope that you will find an opportunity to use it, of course. And I give now the floor to my colleague Subhash, who will guide you through the publication. So thanks a lot. And again, so enjoy the webinar today.
Thank you, Dennis. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, Subash.
Yeah. So can I have the slides? Yeah, maybe we can move to the next. So Denny has already given the background. Yeah, so this is the overall outline. I think Denny covered the first bullet, which is more giving the background and scope and what is the context for all this guidance. And from my side, I would also like to thank the donors and also the UNEP colleagues for giving this opportunity to author this publication together with other colleagues. Uh, and uh, and uh, and the other my presentation here is more structured around the chapters which are in the guidance. And so we have the second chapter, which is more on the mitigation actions in the tourism sector. Then we have a chapter which is dedicated to giving some background to people who are not very conversant with finance on how to write a business case proposal. And then finally, different steps of writing a business proposal. A lot of my slides in this presentation would be on the last part, which is on how to write a business proposal. So let's go now into the next slide. Uh, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, I think this has been covered by Dennis. So if you can go to the next. Next slide. Yeah. So as I said, we have these four chapters, out of which first was more the introductory chapter, which has been already covered. Then this second chapter in the guidance is on the mitigation actions in the tourism sector. And here we have focused more on the businesses itself in terms of defining what are the different mitigation actions, because like a lot of the tourism related emissions, for example, what Denny, when he was giving the background, can be coming also from, for example, traveling from the aviation or cruise, and we have not focused so much on that part. Our focus is more on the businesses within the country. And in that context, you can say there are different, you can say, areas from where the emissions are happening. So they could be coming from this for the space cooling or heating requirements. These could be coming from the food preparation processes, lighting, transport, power and heating requirements, and all that. And we have not gone into a lot of, you can say, details, but we have tried to give a good overview of what could be the different technologies or different measures. And when we are looking at these mitigation actions, we can use this framework which is presented on the right hand side, which describes that these mitigation options could be related to the internal operations of the businesses themselves, but they could also be thinking a little bit about your supply chains from where you're, for example, sourcing your food and energy and all that. And also customers who are an integral part of the tourism. So how we can also through certain interventions change their behavior so that they can take more, you can say, better decisions. For example, to illustrate this point on consumers, for example, if we have some kind of even simple messages inside the rooms which try to tell people that they should switch off the lights or put the AC on a very optimal setting, all these very soft things can also help in reducing the mitigation actions. Now, we will go to the next chapter. I think you can read this chapter. It's a very interesting chapter, which is the chapter 2. Now, chapter next slide, please. So the next chapter I would say is very, you can say, relevant for people who have not been working so much on the finance side, but at the same time would like to develop a business proposal for themselves. And this chapter covers a lot of, you can say, topics. It starts with a description of what could be the sources of finance more at the global level. But it also gives an introduction to what is the role. I think in the opening remarks, Andrea also mentioned about private public finance, the different kind of, you can say, donors which can be there for financing of actions in the tourism sector. But here I would just like to highlight that if we look at the, you can say, what is happening within the climate finance landscape, you can see private sector plays a very significant part of the whole picture. And but at the same time, public finances are also important because they are directly funding the projects, but also because public finance is also coming in the way of, you can say, policy incentives which are provided for the businesses to take certain decisions. For example, tax exemptions and all that. This is also public finance contributions which can direct certain investments into certain technologies and all that. So that we should not, you can say that the public finance has a very limited role. At the same time, whenever we start thinking of climate finance, we typically have that, you can say, thinking that it is grant financing we are talking about. But I would like to highlight here that especially on the mitigation side, grant financing which is available is very limited, and it can be critical in some cases, but in large number of cases it may not be even relevant, and it's extremely difficult to obtain it. On the right hand side, I actually have this graph which is not only trying to show you different, you can say, financial instruments which can be used for funding the projects. For example, we could be broadly using equity, we could be using debt, or we could be using grants. But this whole, for example, landscape is, for example, on the debt side, especially because it's much more diverse, because I think Andrea also mentioned about green bonds and all that. So this debt based financing can be having a very different, you can say, names and nomenclatures which is available. And in this chapter 3, you can get a very good description of different financial instruments which are available, and also it is also trying to give you some kind of a uh, uh, mapping in terms of tables of which kind of financial institutions can provide these kind of instruments. So you have some idea, if we are looking at, for example, concessional finance, which are the institutions which can provide us this kind of a concessional finance and all that. Then this chapter also covers, especially this is relevant if we are looking for climate financing for our projects. So we have different concepts there or principles of financing which are used, like concessionality, additionality. So these kind of principles I'm not going, because my presentation is only 10, 15, 20 minutes, but you can find them very written in a very easily understandable format about these very important principles, especially if you're looking at climate finance side, the concessionality principle, the additionality principle, or about co-financing, which many funders are looking, the co-financing requirements and all that. Then this chapter also covers, especially for a beginner, and there are actually a lot of examples which have been worked out with very simple numbers, uh, like when we are doing financial analysis, we are talking about calculating certain financial ratios like net present value, internal rate of return of projects, or the payback period of the projects, and debt service coverage ratio. And these are very important financial ratios which are seen by banks and funding institutions when you are submitting proposals. So this uh, to make you conversant with them. This is provided, the definitions and the mathematical formulations are provided, but these are also very standard functions within the Excel. So it's not that you can say complicated to math. But in any case, if there is a need, we also had prepared an Excel file for all these calculations. If required, you can write to us and we can provide you the Excel file where we have done the example illustration of the example that goes here. Then this is again, once again, very relevant when you are looking at funding from the climate finance side. So besides financial analysis, the donors would also like to understand what are the non-financial impacts of the projects. For example, the GHG impacts. So you cannot monetize, you can monetize them, for example, through certain you can say climate instruments. For example, now Article 6 and all that is coming into the picture. So there is a potential for using that kind of thing to monetize, for example, the GHG emissions. But that is one part. But there are also other non-GHG impacts which needs to be quantified, and these are also described inside this chapter in terms of the economic, social, environmental impacts and all that. Next slide, please. So now I will move on to you can say the chapter 4 of the guidance, which provides you these 8 steps of how to write down a business proposal. And I will cover all of these 8 steps in very brief, but you can refer to the guidance also when you are back. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the first task whenever we are you can say developing a concept is developing a business proposal is to describe the concept. So this starts with, first of all, understanding what is the service or we are talking about. Is this a project about cooking, reducing mitigation from the cooking operations or from our cooling operations? This is the first part of when we are looking at the concept. Then we try to understand uh, what is the technology what we are using currently and what is the technology we are trying to introduce, which can result in the reduction of the CO2 emissions. For example, in this guidebook, we have used the of you can say the this example of an efficient chiller which is using water-based cooling instead of air-cooled, you can say chiller, which is using a refrigerant, which has a very high global warming potential. Uh, so understanding the technology is very important, what we are introducing, and it is understanding in terms of the technology, but also in terms of its cost and all that. The other thing is when we are introducing these technologies, in some cases, the introduction of a technology could be not impacting the consumers. Consumers may not even realize that we have introduced this technology. For example, if we have improved the cooking operations inside the kitchen, the customers may not be even realize it. But in certain cases, it may be affecting the end users or the customers of your business itself. So it is also important to understand when we introduce this technology, what is the impact or implications it will have on the customers. Then finally, where we also try to then especially when this is very relevant in case we are submitting these concepts or proper projects for funding to a donor, so they would also like to understand what is the transformational impact, so that it is not like a one-off project we are doing and trying to get some money from that. And there are different, you can say, frameworks which we can use for explaining this logic, transformational logic. So like in case of GCF proposals, they use this results based framework. But you can also use the logical framework approach, which is very old and well established approach to explain this kind of you can say transformational impacts as well. Next step, please. The task 2. Yeah. So we are looking, first we started looking more at the at within internally inside the business. Then we should also try to, when we are preparing these kind of proposals, we should also be looking at more the outside what is happening. So there are two parts. One is the macroeconomic setting. So what are they, for example, and these will be relevant for when we go to that stage, final stages, when we start doing financial analysis. So we start understanding the macro economic settings. So what are the foreign exchange rates? For example, if you are importing something or technology, or it has some components which would be imported. So exchange rates become very relevant to understand what are the exchange rates. We may be going for financing from banks, and so what are the interest rates which are prevailing, what kind of inflation is happening and all that. Then the other thing is very specific to the project which we are implementing, and that is covered more under the regulatory settings. So if we are setting up, for example, a new some kind of a plant or something, does it require any permits? Does it require any environmental, you can say, clearances? Is it governed by certain energy regulations? For example, if I set up my own generation facility, I may need to understand whether I am allowed by the electric utilities to do that. Then it is also about understanding what is the taxation, and also when we are in the construction phase, or even in the operations phase, what are the health and safety issues, because there can be certain regulations which we need to take care. So once we have understood this, we move to the next task. Next step, please. The next step is, given that we have now understood what we are trying to do, we have some understanding of what is the overall macro context for this. Then we start defining what are the different activities. And these activities we can broadly divide in terms of the different phases of the project. So what are the activities we will do in terms of proposal preparation stage? What are the activities which will be required when we start the construction and operations of the and pre-operations of the project, during the testing and commissioning of the project, and finally in the operational stage. So this helps us to, this kind of structuring according to the project development cycle helps us to cover and all the activities, and it reduces the you can say errors associated with missing out on any very critical activity. So this can be done initially by like a core team which has initiated this whole project proposal development. But now we are at a stage where it is important to also try to widen the team and try to assign responsibilities to those people who will be subsequently responsible for implementing these activities. So because there could be one or two people who have initiated this idea at a certain level, but now when we are going into this detailed planning stage, it is also important to involve other, you can say, I would not call stakeholders, but other people who are within your organization who will be taking responsibilities. And once this has been done, they will also become contributors for the implementation plan. For example, we will need information on costs, revenues. We would need information on the duration of activities, how much time each activity would take. So all these things, we require a team now at this stage who can tell us and take ownership of the various activities. So on the right hand side, you can see this table in which this information which we are collecting is being put, and we can call this as a, you can say, a rough implementation plan which is coming into the shape. Next slide, please. So I was talking about initially also that when we are targeting these proposals to some donors, they would also like to understand what are the other benefits, non-financial benefits. This is what is provided here. But here on the, because I mentioned that we are trying to cover this proposal for chiller. So for that chiller, this table is showing what are the other non-financial impacts. Next slide, please. Now we have, you can say, in the task 4, we had prepared you can say draft implementation plan. So now what we start with to build the base case, we start now uh, uh, dividing or spreading these costs over the duration of the projects. And I will tell you why we are doing it, because we have to subsequently do the financial analysis. So whatever information we collected in the implementation plans in terms of cost and durations. Now we will start plotting it in terms of the timelines. So what will happen in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So this you can say kind of disaggregation is done for both the operating cost as well as for the revenues. So what kind of revenues will this project result in? And these are also divided. Then to build, and we are what we are trying to build some kind of a cash flow statement, which you can see this figure on the right hand side is trying to show you what are the cash flows for this project, what are the outgoing and what is incoming for the project. And for that you also need to build up a cash flow. You also need information on interest rates, income tax rates, discount rates and all that. And you also need to understand, because for example, when we talk of interest rates, you would also need to understand what is the financing structure. So is the project going to be implemented totally with our own internal funds of the business, or are we trying to seek some loans? And if we are seeking some loans, are we also looking for some kind of a concessional finance and all that? So in that context, we need to understand what is the financing structure at the base case stage. Now at this stage, because it is this whole thing is a little bit of a sometimes an iterative process. So we can at the very beginning make certain assumptions to build up the base case. And then uh, I, when we come to the next stage, the scenario analysis, we can then take a final decision on this. So next slide, please. So based on the cash flow we had built in the tasks in the base case, we do some kind of a financial analysis because we have collected all the necessary information which is required for building a base case. And you can see here on the right hand side a table which is presenting the base case and different scenarios. And we have done for the base case a computation for the different financial ratios like the net present value, the internal rate of return, and the debt service coverage ratio. Now based on whatever you can say assumptions or inputs we had for the base case, we have done some kind of calculations for the base case. For example, in the base case, the IRR is almost like 60%. It has a positive net present value and the debt service coverage ratio is 7.8, which is fairly adequate. So as I said, this kind of a case does not require any kind of a concessional finance or uh, it can be implemented using the commercial finance. But then to understand that this base case is very robust, we also try to do some kind of a scenario analysis. And the scenario analysis is trying to see what could happen, for example, if uh, let's say the construction costs exceed. And in this case, we are saying if let's say they become 5% higher. So what will happen to the different financial ratios? Obviously, if the construction costs increase, your IRR goes down, net present value goes down, and all these financial ratios become worse. Similarly, we have assumed some grant. So let's say if we don't get that grant, what will happen? Similarly, we have assumed certain revenues for the project and we run a scenario. If these revenues go down by 20%, what will happen to the fire? If you see in this particular case, for all the scenarios we run, the project remains financially viable. So we can say that this is a project which can be implemented without, but there are many projects where this would not be the case. This is a very, you can say, very positive kind of a project where everything is turning out to be, you can say, positive. But this is also because I would also, I forgot to mention because uh, in this guidebook, we have in the end actually also uh, an analysis of different mitigation options which was done for Dominican Republic, and this was done using the GASMO model. And you can see most of the mitigation options had a negative mitigation cost, and so they can be implemented without any additional support from the climate finance side. And this was also one of the technologies which was showing you can say negative mitigation costs, and it is very beneficial for the business to implement these kind of projects because, as was mentioned earlier, they can help in improving the efficiency of the business and improve their bottom lines. And next slide, please. And first, in the end, I would like to thank that I would like to put the cover of this publication, which you can read and Denny also encouraged you that this can be especially good reference material for those of you who are developing a business proposal. And I would also like to thank Denny, who was the other lead author for this publication, and also our contributing authors. And as you can see, Federico, Jorge, Miret, they were from the UNEP CCC, Andrea and Helene from UNEP, who have also contributed in no less major for this publication. And I thank all the contributing authors for this, and happy to take any questions we have if you have on my presentation.
Thank you very much, Subhash and Denny, for providing that international context on why and how the private sector can play a crucial role in financing climate smart investments, and walking us through the 8 steps to write a business proposal for applying for this necessary funding for, of course, these kinds of investments. So, so far, no urgent questions in the chat box. So we can address any later questions in the open forum later, Subash. So if that's fine with you. Um, I also encourage
Yeah, yeah,
everyone
no
to.
problem. No problem.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Subash. So
Yeah.
I also encourage everyone to download the Making the Business Case document. We sent the link in the chat box. Okay, so without further ado, our next speaker will provide some actual examples of climate finance in the tourism sector, as well as some funding opportunities for businesses through public private partnership. Um, she holds a master in environmental management, and since 2019, she works for the GIZ program, ProClima, promoting sustainable cooling solutions. She is an advisor responsible for the implementation of projects in Asia, in particular the Philippines. Currently, Lara is coordinating the component in the Philippines of the global project C42, funded by the International Climate Initiative of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, nature conservation, nuclear safety, and consumer protection. The project advises countries how to develop greenhouse gas mitigation strategies in the cooling sector and assists in the implementation of specific measures, including the cooperation with the private sector and industry. So please welcome Lara Alexandra Deutsch. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Advisor at GIZ, who will talk about accelerating green cooling in the tourism sector through private-public partnership. So, Lara, you have the floor for 25 minutes.
Thank you so much, Andy. Yeah, and Lara is completely fine. And apologies also for the long title of our German ministry. We stumble across that title sometimes as well. Yeah, thank you first of all for inviting me to speak on that during that very, very interesting webinar today. I hope you can hear me well. I'm actually currently in Bangkok in between some conferences sitting here. So apologies for if there are some background noises. Yeah, today I will be speaking about green cooling, giving yeah, some examples of how green cooling can be implemented in the tourism sector, and also, yeah, showing potentials on reducing greenhouse gas emission, energy consumption, and costs in that regard for hotels in particular, and what financing mechanism could support in that sustainable transition to green cooling in that sector. Yeah, so maybe just giving a short introduction. I don't know if I can click forward myself. I just try to. Otherwise, I will let you know. I think it's not working. Okay, then just the next slide. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, so just giving a quick background on where I am working at GIZ ProClima. It is a program established in 1995 already, working for that time in the context of implementing technical project for ozone protection under the Montreal Protocol. And since 2016, also to the Kigali Amendment, when it comes to phasing down HFCs, so other refrigerants with a high global warming potential. And yeah, GIZ Proclima has the main goal on promoting and introducing natural refrigerants and energy efficient appliances in the refrigeration and air conditioning sectors in its partner countries, and is working on behalf of different ministries as listed below. Proclima's work in different areas. So we are doing policy advice when it comes to implementing Montreal Protocol, Kigali Amendment, but also on working towards integrating the cooling sector in countries' NDCs. Then we're promoting technology transfer, so shifting and accelerating the market entrance of those green cooling technologies, which I will explain later in more detail. And then also a big focus is capacity building. So for example, training cooling technicians in the field of applying those green cooling technologies. So next slide, please, because there on that slide you will see our green cooling approach, how we work or under which vision we work. So for us, green cooling are energy efficient and climate and ozone friendly cooling technologies. We do not support interims technologies. So under the Montreal Protocol, CFCs and HCFCs, which are ozone depleting, are being phased out. And now with the Kigali Amendment, HFCs, which have still a high global warming potential, are regulated as well. Nevertheless, they are in the market and still very prominently, so that we always work towards leapfrogging towards green cooling, using like technologies using natural refrigerants, and at the same time having a high energy efficiency. Next slide, please. As Andy has already mentioned, we are working within different projects under GIZ Proclima. One of them is the Cool Contribution Fighting Climate Change project, implementing activities on promoting and advancing the international control of those F gases, so refrigerants, and also promoting energy efficient cooling technologies in different countries. Target countries were Costa Rica, Cuba, Grenada, Iran, Philippines, and Vietnam. I will be today focusing on the Philippines, on our activities in the Philippines. Listed on the next slide, some of our project highlights. So the project has been running until last year, but there is a continuation now with the C4-2 project. But under the C4, under the first phase, we have achieved a few things which I just want to quickly mention now. One of the main goals we have reached is integrating the RUC sector in the Philippines NDCs. And as Dennis has already mentioned at the beginning, Philippines has submitted its first NDCs in 2021 and has now included the cooling sector in their calculations, as well as in the policy and technology measures to take in order to achieve the formulated target. And one of the target is to switch to low global warming potential refrigerants. As a baseline to formulate those target and calculate the emissions, we have provided data. We have developed a inventory of the RUC sector showing the emissions, where they come from, disaggregated on different subsectors. So looking in particular also at the cooling in buildings, but also refrigeration, commercial air conditioning, commercial refrigeration, domestic, etc. In addition, we have cooperated with different training institutes, have installed green cooling, so-called R290 propane split ACs for training reasons, and have trained trainer in that regard as well, so that also the training infrastructure or the technical infrastructure is ready to install and maintenance those green cooling technologies. Yeah, I would leave it with that. And on the next slide, I have listed some activities we are now planning to do in the Philippines on the second phase. So building up on the successes of the first phase, so that like the cooling sector is now part of the NDCs of the Philippines. So we are now looking at, okay, how can we achieve that? What kind of measures are needed to implement those NDCs, and also already looking at the next phase of updating NDCs. Yeah, how can we improve the data availability? And yeah, in this framework, we will also be working on improving the enforcement system of minimum energy performance standards of cooling technology, as this is also a very important accelerator to market uptake of highly energy efficient technologies. Further work on capacity building, but also support innovation. For example, when it comes to PV powered split ACs. So looking at how can we further mitigate the climate impact of cooling in buildings by combining those technologies also with the use of renewable energy. Yeah, why am I talking so much about cooling in buildings? It is, as we have identified in the inventory as well, the subsector with one of the highest mitigation potentials for the Philippines, and also the highest growth rate for the next decades. So this will be a huge challenge, but at the same time a huge potential, and the tourism sector is part of it. So on the next slides, you can actually already jump 2 slides ahead, because now I will be presenting example of the cooling in the tourism sector. So we have under C4.1 developed a study called a publication on non-state action towards climate change, showing mitigation actions in different private sector or for different private sector actors with high cooling demand. And one example was included focusing on hotels. Yeah, for hotels, there are 2 fields to switch to green cooling technologies. One is in refrigeration, and one in cooling in buildings for like thermal comfort regarding air conditioning. And in this context, cooling makes more than 50% usually of the energy consumptions in hotels in warm regions like the Philippines, for example. And in this study, I have also linked it in my publication. There has been estimated that the total RAC, so refrigeration and air conditioning related emissions of hotels in 2015 was around 500,000 tons of CO2 equivalents, with a mitigation potential until 2050 of 27% through shifting to low global warming potential refrigerants and high energy efficient technologies at the same time. And with that, this gives you a very general idea on how this sector, how the tourism sector can actually contribute on achieving the national NDCs as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, on the next slide, you see an example just showing one of the technologies we are promoting, energy efficient green split ACs using the climate-friendly hydrocarbon refrigerant R290, which presents a cost-efficient and sustainable solution, for climate protection in the cooling sector. And here is a comparison, general comparison of conventional ACs with low energy efficiency and high global warming potential, like the regular refrigerant being used in this subsector is, for example, R410A with a global warming potential of over 2,000 compared to CO2, whereas propane R290 has a global warming potential of 1, just to give you an idea of the mitigation we are talking about here. And further mitigation can be achieved by not only switching to green ACs and reducing emissions through switching to lower global warming potential refrigerants, but also to combine those technologies with PV, so with photovoltaic solar power. On the next slide, you see an assessment we did in different countries with very positive results for the Philippines. There it is. So you see here, and I have also linked the publication, that for all different kinds of combinations of cooling, air conditioning, together with solar power or PV systems, you have a positive effect when it comes to the net present value compared to base case scenario, which was a conventional AC using HFCs as refrigerants, which shows that even though in some cases the investment costs are higher at the beginning, they will pay out quickly, especially also with the combination of using renewable energy to power those technologies. Next slide, please. And this is something, this innovational approach, this is something we would like to promote also under the second phase of C4, where we want to demonstrate those solar-powered green air conditioner. And this is also a potential for the tourism sector to engage here and cooperate with us. We will in the next months develop this project concept again, but if you are already interested in participating, feel free to contact us already. So the idea is to cooperate with the private sector, willing to install those green air conditioners, but at the same time contributing to the project by installing PV systems to provide those ACs with solar power in the end. And then GIZ contributes by procuring those green ACs, installing them, and assuring that trained technicians install them as well. Electricity consumption will be monitored to also use that as a showcase for the Philippines to exactly demonstrate what I've been showing on the slide before, that this is a very cost-efficient option and win-win case for the private sector, as well as for reaching climate targets of a country. On the next slide, there is another option of promoting private sector activities. It's under the Develop PP project framework. Develop PP is a program that has been used by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, to realize projects in cooperation with the private sector, so private-public partnerships, and it should support private companies together with GIZ as an implementing agency to plan, finance, and implement cost-efficient mitigation actions in that framework. On the next slide, you see some key facts about this program, with more information provided in the link below. So you can directly go on the website of Develop. They are usually opening calls, several calls a year, I think up to 3 calls for proposals per year. Currently, due to the restructuring of the German government, the call for proposal has been paused. I will make sure to inform you as soon as those calls for proposal has been reopened again. But in general, the target group is open to companies from Germany, European Union, as well as local companies with viable project ideas for a positive development impact. They use their investment resource and capacity for innovation in order to expand their operations in countries of the global south. This ranges from projects in the field of vocational training to the development of sustainable supply chains and piloting new technologies. And the funding is between 100,000 and 2 million euros, where it is expected that the private sector contribute with 50% contributions as well. I've also listed the company criteria, but they are in more detail also included on the website. So just have a look at the website of Develop PPP. On the next 2 slides, and this is also those are also the final slides from my end. I think so, at least, is a case study on climate-friendly cooling in the hotel industry, just to give you an idea on how a project could look like in public-private partnerships. The slide after shows the case quite well. It is like you as a hotel wish to increase the ecological awareness and reduce your carbon footprint, for example, and wish to switch to green cooling technologies, but you are not sure which technologies are the best and where to get access to them, and about the investment costs, they are still an additional barrier. So now you're looking for someone supporting you in making the right technical adjustment and give financial support. And this is where the idea of Develop steps in, offering a solution for that challenge. So within the Develop concept, GIZ can provide the technical and financial support by, for example, training service technicians in installing and maintaining the required technologies, providing the access to the technologies, and so on. This is just a general overview of how the project could be structured like. On the next slides, I have just listed the publications I've been talking about, which could be interesting for you. So the first one is the one on non-state actions towards climate-friendly energy efficient cooling, where the example of a hotel has been displayed, and also some examples from the Philippines, like how high the mitigation potential is, etc. And then, as an example, GIZ Pro Klima has also developed a green cooling roadmap, so specifically on cooling, as an example, and took an example of a hotel in Sri Lanka, but nevertheless, a lot of those actions that are recommended within that publication are also valid for the tourism sector in the Philippines. And last but not least, the study on photovoltaic powered air conditioning in buildings with the technical economic analysis, where an assessment of the Philippines has also been part of. Yeah, we are all of our green cooling projects are working under the or are part of the green cooling initiative. So you can yeah, just scan the code and have a look at our website. All of our publications are available there as well. And we also invite you to become a member to stay up to date on latest green cooling developments. And whenever we have any events, they will also be shared on the website here. Yeah, those are backup slides. I won't get into the detail on that. So yeah, that's from my side. If you have any questions, happy to address them in the Q&A session later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lara, for taking the time to discuss projects from GIZ Proclima, even though you already have an ongoing event. So again, thank you so much for your time, as well as by sharing those impressive project highlights and case study from Proclima, as well as how the refrigeration and cooling sector provides a lot of potential, especially cross-cutting hotels to achieve lower emissions, especially as it is included in our Philippine NDCs. So, no questions so far in the chat box, but again, we highly encourage everyone to ask any burning questions that you may have later in the open forum. So, again, thank you, Lara. Um, so, last but not the least, our next speaker will present to us one of the local funding opportunities here in the Philippines, wherein hotels, restaurants, and other facilities can apply. So, standing in for Sir Ronaldo Averion, who was initially our speaker, our next speaker is a graduate of Don Bosco Technical College and is also with the Renewable Energy team of Land Bank's Program Management Department. He currently handles evaluation of loan proposals on renewable energy. So everyone, please welcome Engineer Narciso Roy Reyes, who will talk about empowering climate action projects for MSMEs and governments. So, Engineer Roy, you have the floor for around 25 minutes.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear po.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon. So I'm here to discuss about our Land Bank Go Green program, which is a sub program under our Real Energy program, which covers renewable energy and energy efficiency programs. So can you present the slide, please? Yeah. Next slide, please. So this program was developed because of our government policy that which requires the government offices to reduce energy consumptions by using energy efficient solutions. So, and due to lack of accessible financing, our land bank, created this program for micro, small, medium enterprises and LGUs to um, have a source of financing for their energy efficiency projects. Next slide, please. So our main objective is to provide financing packages for energy efficient solutions for LGUs, businesses, and other government offices. So which for tourism, which is hotels, and for LGUs, they could finance their, for example, solar street lights, replacement of LEDs. Another example is they could finance for solar aircons for hotels and others. Um, Next slide, please. Okay. Our target sector is for, like I said earlier, is for small, medium enterprises and LGUs. So the type of project is for energy efficient cold storage, for supermarkets, for manufacturing warehouse, for hotels and restaurants, commercial industrial buildings, for schools, for shopping centers, and other buildings. Next slide, please. So our target borrowers are, like I said earlier, is LGUs. So for small medium enterprises, they should be registered as single proprietorship, partnership, either corporation or cooperatives. Schools and other universities are also part of the borrowers, as well as um, government-owned and controlled corporations. Next slide. These are some of our eligible projects for under Go Green program. So, for example, one is non-fossil energy sources like solar rooftops, small windmill turbines, hybrid energy generator, waste to energy projects. Second is thermal insulation and heat exchange systems. For example, is a roof and wall heat insulation, light reflective coatings, um, and installation of energy efficient air exhaust, solar water heaters, etc. Another is installation or adoption of energy efficient cooling system like a replacement of high efficiency motors, inverter type air conditioning, automation of escalators and blowers using high energy equip automation of high energy using equipment like escalators and blowers. And lastly, some energy efficient lightings like LED lights and solar powered lights. Next slide, please. The requirements are usually the corporate papers, so personal information about the borrower, the proposed project details, financial projections and the cost saving projections, contract agreements with contract agreements like EPC and ESCO contracts. Next slide, please. The monthly cost savings computation. So this for example, solar lights. So there's an energy projection. So you could have savings when you use solar panels as what do you call this? When you use solar panels, it will decrease your energy usage from the grid. So there's an energy savings cost. So the computation will be provided by usually the ESCOs and valid certificates, permits, and licenses. Financial documents for small medium enterprises and other businesses. You need at least 3 years um, financial statements. For new businesses, we only need the interim financial statements. For government entities, we need the monetary board opinions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Then the electric billing statement for the last 3 months. Collateral documents. They need to fill out an application form at our lending centers. And other requirements shall be informed by our lending centers through our borrowers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the loan purpose is for the acquisition and construction or installation of equipment, system and license, building materials, structures that will result into efficient and cost-effective use of energy that will translate into significant reduction of energy bills of the borrower. The type of credit facility is term loan. Next slide, please. The maximum loanable amount is 90%. So the bank will finance 90% of your project cost. The maximum loan tenor will be 15 years, or the remaining economic useful life of the finance project. Next slide, please. Currently, our interest will be our lending rate at the current market rate. So it should not be lower than 6% per annum. The repayment will be an equal monthly amortization, so it will be principal plus interest. The acceptable collateral will be the object of financing. It must be insured through our own insurance brokerage. Then maintenance of land bank. They are required to open a land bank account with at least 2 month amortization, and call assignment of contractors or insurance in favor of land bank. That is it. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you
you have
so
any
much.
questions?
Yes. Thank you so much, Engineer Reyes, for your time and for standing in for Sir Oni. Tama po ba yung... Is the pronunciation
Yes,
correct? Sir Oni. Ayun.
yes,
So
yes, ma'am.
yeah, thank you for standing in and for sharing Land Bank's Go Green Inclusive Financing Program. So I hope that further encourages the businesses here to try to apply for the program so that we can really mitigate our emissions from the sector. So I guess I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but I do have a few on my end. So if it's okay, Andrea, maybe we can head over to the open forum. Um, I guess I can if I can start the open forum, maybe to our speakers, Subash and Denny and Lara. If you can kindly open your cameras again and your mics. Thank you. Uh, do I see Subash and Danny? Okay. Okay, great. It's nice that you guys are in one frame. Okay, so I guess from on me personally, I would like to ask um maybe what would be the challenges that some businesses may encounter when applying for these proposals, or have you in your experience and in your field, do you guys know any of the common I guess barriers that can um, that businesses are like discouraged from applying. Yeah. Anyone can start. Maybe Lara, would you like to say something on the matter?
Yes, I
Thank
can start. Yeah, maybe some very general barriers we are facing a lot. I will now concentrate on cooling in buildings regarding air conditioning and focusing on supporting green cooling technologies with natural refrigerants. So the technologies are available, but the access is still not common, especially in the Philippines. Also, it's sometimes hard to get those green cooling technologies, and then in the end also to be a front runner in that context. But I mean, this is something we really want to support with, like also having the access to the technologies. But of course, this is still a barrier because as there is no wider application of the technologies. Many end users are still hesitant to go those first steps and actually demonstrate those highly energy efficient technologies. And yeah, this is what I would say one of the main barriers is still the low spread of those technologies, and therefore the low awareness of the actual mitigation potential that end users like hotels could achieve.
Okay, thank you for that. For enlightening us on that question, Lara. Subash or Denny, would you like to say something on the matter regarding challenges that
Maybe
businesses encounter?
yeah, in a very general context, the main financial barrier could be First of all, awareness itself of the technology. For example, the green technologies which Lara is talking about within the businesses, that could itself be a barrier. The other is like in other contexts, we have seen that typically the greener and cleaner technologies, they are more efficient and they can have other benefits. But in a number of cases, they have high upfront capital costs, which itself becomes you can say barrier for businesses. For example, in case of we are working with a number of countries on EVs, and in those cases, if the policy or financial incentives provided from the public side can offset these higher capital costs, then businesses become more keen to adopt these technologies. Because we cannot always just say you have good financial ratios, so businesses will be investing. So there is an irrationality there. So despite having positive NPV and good IRRs and maybe very 3-year payback or 2-year payback period, you still see that people are not investing in them. And it could be because and then from the funding side, the banks sometimes are more conservative in lending for relatively unknown or technologies which are not well established in a market. So green technologies, they can very well understand, okay, there is a conventional split air conditioner, but if I say I have now a technology which will be very green and clean, but at the same time, no experience in the country, the banks will be a little bit more hesitant to come forward and give. So it's also a question of what kind of risk appetite is there from the bank. So I think in that context, I think what GIZ is doing is bridging that gap, because I think they have that risk. They are more risk taking, and you can say. So in that sense, these are some of the. But these are very. I personally don't work directly with the businesses. We are here, so I cannot say so much on how the businesses and the banks are working. But these are from a very general observations, and I think Denny has some other inputs as well.
Yes, I can maybe add, not directly, I would say, related to financial criteria, but it's also what we see is that a lot of time businesses are, I would say, blocked by the administrative burden that to prepare, I would say, a financial proposal or a project itself, when they have to prepare projects to submit to, for example, international development banks. So a lot of times, so this, at least the documentation needs to be done so in specific formats. It's may require heavy, I would say, information, and the quality of the proposal also is in this case sometimes quite low. From a other angle also, we know that some technology may require also an interruption of the business activities when we talk about accommodation sector. So if we, for example, talk about replacing larger chillers in in an hotel, so it may require some internal organization from the business perspective to allow these changes. And also, these type of criteria are quite a lot of times seen as challenges or a barrier by the businesses themselves. So maybe I wanted to add this. I think Lara wanted to add something. Oh, sorry, I had.
No, I just wanted to comment that on what you have just said, Subhash, that of taking higher risk. I think it's important to note. Yeah, it's because of the the experience we have with that green ACs and those technologies already. We are already well aware that the risks are actually quite low. So it's not really that we are risk takers, but rather being aware that the actual risk is quite low of promoting those technologies.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that, Lara, and also for your responses, Subhash and Denny. So, maybe no, just real quick before I go to the chat box. Engineer Reyes, would you like to address that question? Do you encounter any challenges in within your? I mean, that businesses encounter when applying.
Usually, what we encounter is the borrowers are hesitant to replace their existing um, tech, existing source of energy. For example, as long as the mindset of most of the borrower is as long as their current system works, they don't want to replace it, so they are more hesitant. So the second thing is more likely the cost. So the cost, for example, the replacement of high efficient motors, it would cost much higher than to replace with it a normal motor. So for regarding the risk, so for banks, as long as they have collateral, we could manage the risk as long as they could provide the collateral. So I think that we could mitigate the concern regarding the risk. Then um, for the term loans, since our maximum term loan is 15 years, I don't think the borrowers would have a difficult time in repaying for the loans. So it's most of the problem would fall on the hesitancy of the borrowers to replace their systems. Thank you.
Okay, got that. Thank you, Engineer Reyes. And I believe that can maybe provide like a parang representative set of challenges for the rest of the development banks here in the Philippines that are offering these kinds of programs. So, yeah, again, thank you for sharing your insights. Moving on to the chat box. So, we have a question for Denny and Subash. Would you still need to establish some sort of a baseline to conduct the task on the climate scenario analysis? So, either of you can start.
Yeah, I think the financial analysis, we need to have some understanding of the baseline technology, especially when we are trying to understand what are the impacts, because it is with reference to the baseline technology only that these impacts and all that calculations will be done.
Yeah, I guess it may also depends on the type of, I would say, donors or bank that you want to target. For example, I don't know the bank in the Philippines, so that's your colleague Narciso Reyes here represent. I don't know if they require such type of criteria, but definitively. So if you want to target climate change programs, I would say belonging to a international development bank, you will have to show how the new technology so reduce the GHG emissions. So you will have to demonstrate the reductions in comparison to business as usual scenario, which implies so the technology that probably you are currently using.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your responses on that. JM, I hope that that answered your question. So I'll be moving on to another one for Lara. How large in size should the hotel be for the switch to green AC to be effective? So that's already been answered by Miss Marai, but maybe you'd like to add a few words, Lara?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so that pretty much depends on what yeah you're planning to implement in your hotel. But the available technologies on the market, they range from 6,000 BTU cooling capacity to 24,000 BTU cooling capacity, using for the split ACs, so those split type technologies. But if you are, for example, and that is what Subhash has also mentioned before, want to also switch technologies also towards green cooling technologies, looking at more larger systems, like for example installing a chiller or multiple speed air conditioning systems. There are also different options, and those can also cover larger cooling capacities needed. I will post also a publication from us. This is focusing also on the split type green AC technology, which gives a good overview on the technologies that are available, how they work, and yeah, how efficient they are compared to conventional ACs. But as already mentioned before, there are also like larger systems which might be more energy efficient in the end when covering larger hotels as well, or yeah, trying to implement larger system for cooling down hotels.
Okay, thank you for also sharing the resource guide, Lara, and also for answering the question. Yeah, JM, I hope that the question is the response is okay for you. So one more for Engineer Reyes. How many MSMEs have availed of this program? Is this limited to major cities here in the Philippines, or is it also open to resort towns as well?
For Undergo Green, we currently have three borrowers. So one is for a personal use for a sig proprietorship. Then two are for one is for a school, and another one is for a hospital. So for tourist spots, we currently have no borrowers yet. Then what's the second question, ma'am?
Is this limited to major cities here in the Philippines, or is
I
it
know
also open to
nationwide. It's open nationwide.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, engineer. So I guess the challenges also that you mentioned a while ago, parang they're a kind of telling of the limited number then of the number of businesses that have successfully applied to the program, right? So there. Thank you for sharing your insights on that. And also, JM has a follow-up question. Does Land Bank provide climate education as part of the efforts to join this program?
Climate education. More, I think our environmental department could answer that question. So currently, I don't handle that program.
Okay, no worries. Thank you for that. And JM, you have a follow-up for Denny and Subash. But I guess while waiting for you to send it in the chat box. I guess I have another follow-up question of my own to the speaker. So, when I think more private sector businesses really need to know more about these financing initiatives. So, it's more of a how do you say this? Maybe like a promotion or marketing issue that not that many businesses know about these kinds of programs. So my question is, how do we further um, get this information to the right people so that they know that these opportunities already exist and can therefore apply? So who would like to answer? um, Maybe Lara, if you.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I think platforms like this, what we are doing right now, are very usable and very good, because this is really using synergies from different projects and combining it under that framework. So I think something like that should happen more often. And then that's also what we are trying to do under the framework of the Green Cooling Initiative to reach a larger target group of end users, and also invite end users from our partner countries to be part of that initiative to stay up to date, because there we will also already often provide opportunities for accessing finance to accelerate sustainable, in our context, green cooling technologies. But nevertheless, if this is also a platform where we can promote other programs which follow the same or similar approach. But I agree that it's still a major challenge, I think, to raise that awareness and find platforms to reach end users. And we are working on that topic in our projects as well. And for example, within the C4 project that I have presented, and with the idea of supporting selected hotels in implementing PV powered ACs, we will also organize a call for proposal and advertise it through several channels, also in cooperation with the Department of Environment and the Department of Energy in the Philippines. So this is more or less our approach. So I think platforms like that should just continuously being used to advocate that.
Thank you for that, Lara. And that's why we excitedly await for the call for proposals for the develop program. I'm sure everyone's also looking forward to that. Would anyone else like to answer that question? Denny or Subhash? Oh, you're on mute, Subhash.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add on that, I was saying.
Okay. Then lastly, Engineer Reyes.
For Land Bank, we are currently advertising our programs by our website. So, and also we have brochures on our lending centers. So if you're interested, they could get their brochures on our lending centers, or they could check our website. Then we have inquiries mostly from energy service companies, but we advise them to have their borrowers call our lending centers directly. So until now, we haven't received other endorsement from energy service companies to be part of the borrowers as of land bank.
Okay, thank you for that. At least there are already existing avenues to share this the information about this program. Keeping in mind the time, so I guess we'll just entertain a few more questions from uh, from Lara. Engineer Reyes, are there also eligibility criteria regarding the refrigerant type under your program?
For refrigerants, I think yes, it's under eligible projects, installation or adoption of energy efficient cooling systems and equipment.
Okay, that's great to know. Lara, that okay for you? Yeah. Okay, right. Uh, okay, I guess last two questions. Will Dennis' team be collaborating with PSEPSD in the future on climate finance and tourism? This seems to be a good way forward in strengthening this initiative, especially that the current direction of the banks here in the Philippines are leaning towards sustainable finance. Maybe you could answer that first question first, Denny or Sebastian.
Can you repeat the question?
Will your team be collaborating with PSFC in the future on climate finance and tourism? I thought that you would like to um, answer that, but I guess maybe not to put Subash on the spot, but PSFC is already is already collaborating with them through the TVC project. They are currently creating the baseline, or I guess, yeah, we'll be doing the preparatory work for the baseline of greenhouse gas emissions in the tourism industry. Perhaps you'd like to talk more about that activity, Denny?
Yes, thank you. So indeed, so under this UNEP project, on top of the publication that has been published, presented today, so we have also published another publication, which purpose is to explain, to describe how to estimate a GHG emission reduction. Otherwise, so in the context of this project, so we are also available to provide support to specific businesses to identify specific mitigation options that they might be willing to implement, and providing support also to use a tool which is available in the context of this project to estimate the GHG emission reduction. So, so the so the so if the so participants today are interested in knowing more, I suggest I suggest them to contact Andy, or to contact Andrea from UNEP, so that they can reach out to us. So on top of this, and in relation maybe from, I would say, from a more general consideration, so I just want to recall also that the Philippines has a very strong climate change commission. So I know that they are a very small team, but very efficient, very qualified. So if you are, or if you or any businesses interested also in knowing more about opportunities for International Development Bank, about the Green Climate Fund, I'm pretty sure that you may also contact them internally to learn more about this. So just to recall that also, so that of course that you can use your own resources at national level to know more.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Denny, for sharing that. Yes, for the last question, I think we could ask Andrea to from UNEP to be able to answer if how could other private firms be involved in working on sustainable finance, if UNEP has any existing like specific programs on climate finance.
Mm. Yes, there is a full department actually, UNEP FI, which is UNEP Finance, which works on a great variety of finance mechanism, whether it's on green or blue or sustainable finance approaches. There are also coalitions of banks and others. On tourism specifically, it's more within the tourism team, and we are looking at how we can extend this work, particularly also based on the discussion we today and the publication from UNEP CCC. And then, of course, there's also the climate team who is also working on the topic with UNEP. But then, of course, as you have heard today, there are a lot of financial sources available. It's really about having where they are. When do you need public support? When do you don't need public support? You saw the example of Shubash very well, that not every time you need financial support. Sometimes it's just simply being aware of the technology. Most important is the security and trust in the technology, where again, someone like GSZ can really play a role, because it's not just knowing this technology exists, but knowing you get the quality of the technology you need to have. And then as a next step, look, do I need finance or not? And if yes, what is available nationally, regionally, internationally? And Dennis gave already also very good advice. If you're in the Philippines, you can contact, of course, the Climate Change Commission. You can, of course, contact Andy, who his team is also very knowledgeable about the Philippines. We have the Land Bank today here with us as well. There's the Asian Development Banks, and there are many more people, UNWTO, who are working on the topic. So it's probably more about awareness and trying to bring all the resources together. So for people to be aware of what is feasible. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andrea, for providing an answer to Jem's question. I think in order to close this open forum, I'd just like to say that thank you everyone for a very insightful discussion. Again, it's a pity that we didn't get a private sector speaker for this webinar, but I'm sure that everyone can agree that we've all learned a lot for climate finance in the tourism sector. So, Andrea, would you like to give a few takeaways from this webinar?
Of course, sure. Thank you. So partly you already heard a bit some takeaways, but I would say like the three key takeaways, maybe there are many, but maybe three key takeaways are that the good news is that there is financial and technical support available from public sources for climate mitigation actions in the tourism sector. Um, Not everyone requires those, so it's also good to have a look if you actually really require the financial support or the technical support, or if it's maybe possible without, and you have and through the improved efficiency and the bottom line, it is actually more than sufficient to invest. Also for the benefit, of course, for the full business model and the clients. The main barrier we have heard is clearly being aware of green technologies, aware of green finance and the benefits. Depending on the technology's high upfront costs, which may also be frightening or be a barrier, especially at the beginning. The administrative burden, particularly, of course, when it's for more public sector related and international development banks or funds, which is usually quite extensive proposals. And of course, the experience probably on for some banks which are not yet that experienced on green finance and therefore sometimes more hesitant to provide green finance because there's a perceived higher risk than it is actually. And you heard a very good example actually from both from GIZ and from the land bank that the risk is actually not higher, but there's a perception of higher risk on certain technology. And lastly, probably the most one key point is, of course, the role of public-private partnerships. And today you heard two examples, and you can really see how through piloting technologies and financing mechanism, the risk perception or the real risk of green technologies for mitigation can reduce, and like this, it can little by little and hopefully quicker actually be mainstreamed into commercial banking and just become available as for any other loan or grant someone is requesting. That were my key takeaways. Perhaps someone would like to add, put it in the chat or comment if some additional points. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea. On my part, I would just like to inform everyone if you could please answer our feedback form for the webinar, which has already been uploaded in the chat and also in the next slide. So please also stay tuned for some activities from us in the last few months of the TVC project. But we are not yet done here. There's a lot of work to do, such as an upcoming local workshop on action plan implementation to help hotels and resorts execute their, of course, climate action plans. We also have a capacity building session sometime in late August or early September to talk about existing sustainability certification options for tourism businesses. So, of course, as always, details will follow. And again, thank you to everyone who attended this webinar on mobilizing climate finance, as well as to our dear speakers and organizers. We couldn't have made it a success without you. So, thank you very much, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.